Like most college students who can only afford to eat ramen, it's unfortunate that many Americans find themselves in the same boat. But not because they are in college, but because they are victims of a capitalistic society that does not give them the resources they need to advance their socio-economical status. The major news network CNBC and the POLS 1 peer-reviewed journal both state that a little over 10% of Americans are in poverty, so 37.9 million. This is horrible, but before we can start looking at a solution to this problem, we need to look at what the causes and what keeps the cycle going. The main way we can look at it is looking at the stakeholders, the ones who have some say in what's going on and how the cycle continues. The first stakeholder we have is the impoverished people themselves. You might be wondering why they are a stakeholder in this. Well, it's because they're the ones in poverty. They know the system going on and they know how it affects them. For one thing, they know the stigma associated with being poor. In this capitalistic society, where they value you based off your monetary wealth and how much possessions you own, if you have nothing, then people look down on you. They go like, oh, well, he's horrible, doesn't have anything. So, and if you constantly have people looking down on you, going like, oh, you're not worth anything, you're horrible, then that creates a sense of low morale and low self-worth to where you feel you can never advance yourself, where you can't move on up. This is very demoralizing, and most times they often give this same sense of low morale and low self-worth to their children, where the children go like, oh, I grew up in a bad neighborhood, I can't advance, I can't make something for myself because I'm poor, that's what I always will be. And same thing for their children, and this creates a whole cycle of poverty which affects a whole bunch of people down the line. A second reason why impoverished people are part of the stakeholders is because they know how expensive it is to be poor. A famous example is about work boots, where one good pair of work boots costs $50. And this good pair of work boots will last you about let's say about 10 years, 5-10 years. But the poor people, they can't afford $50, so they get the $20 shoes, $20 work boots. And those are fine, but they only last about a year or so. And after they break, you have to buy another one. Those break again, you buy another one. And soon enough, you surpass the cost of the $50 shoes, the expensive ones. So, as the old saying goes, it takes money to make money. Speaking of money, the second stakeholder is their jobs, the people that pay minimum wage for work. Minimum wage has always been horrible. Right now it's $7.25, and that's not livable off of. Now these jobs, there's no real incentive to raise minimum wage, as there's too many people desperate enough to work to where they could fire someone who's demanding more money. So if you have two employees, one who's working fine for a minimum wage and the other one's like, I demand $10 an hour, $15 an hour, the employer's like, well, I don't want you then, and they fire you and hire someone else right off the street. This is very detrimental for some people, as many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So if they get fired, then they can't live anymore. They're gonna get kicked out of the house and then be on the street, be homeless. And even if they wanted to quit to find a better job, they don't have time to look for a better job, as most times these minimum jobs are very, very demanding, very physically demanding, and they can't set aside time to look for a better one as they're too tired. And another thing, inflation. Inflation has always been a horrible problem for every country in the world, honestly. It was worse than the Great Depression, but now it's kind of manageable, although it's still horrible, especially in these recent years. So, if we look back at the example I gave with these two employees, if the employer does end up paying them $15 an hour each, then soon it's going to be too much for him. He's like, I don't want to keep paying these people this much money, so I'm going to have to raise the prices up so it's like he's still paying them minimum wage. So he's getting compensated from passing the burden of paying them onto the customers. But for him, eventually, it goes like, well, it's too much to keep both of them, so I'm just going to keep one and fire the other one. So now the worker there, he has to keep up and keep trying to do the work of two people because one is fired. It creates a bad system going on. And all this that I just talked about was backed up by the Business Source Unlimited peer-reviewed journal, which they did a topic over minimum wage study in Argentina, which covered these very topics. The last major stakeholder in this issue is local governments. America has always been, especially the government, has always sided with capitalistic entrepreneurs. So a famous example is during the early 1900s, whenever unions wanted to strike, the governors were called in strike breakers and basically break the whole thing up, or National Guard. So you kind of see where the government lies in this issue. Local governments, though, they do something called Red Line District. It's where businesses come in and they want to build somewhere, so government puts up a map and they say, oh, these are good to invest, but these areas you might want to leave alone as you're going to lose money off of. It's good for the government, as then they're making money on the high employment places, the good investment places, and the lower places are just going to be there to basically get disintegrated or break down because there's no new jobs coming in and no new work. They can't advance. Another study that I looked into was from the Washington Post. It was about St. Louis, where they studied cops for 5 months to see who they pull over, who they fine, and who they keep going after. After this 5 months, they determined that a large amount of cops were disproportionately enforcing petty laws and jailing marginalized communities, which often live in poor part of towns, poor part of cities. This has made the problem as it perpetuates racism and it perpetuates a cycle of poverty, where these people go like, oh, the cops against me, the government's against me, how can I expect to advance when all these forces are acting against me? There's no way they can. This doesn't always have to be the case, though, as therefore there are solutions, but they're for later down the line. You can't solve these issues in a year. You need time, money, and effort. But all these stakeholders, especially minimum wage and the government, need to be able to put in the effort to ensure that the people can advance in this world and get rid of the cycle of poverty.